Imagine a place where, in the span of just a few years, young women start vanishing into thin air. No signs, no clues, just gone. Ireland's vanishing triangle, a phrase that chills anyone who remembers those dark years. It was here, in this scenic but shadowed region, that a series of disappearances unfolded, each more mysterious than the last, leaving families and investigators grasping at smoke, haunted by a silence that grew louder with each missing person. Between the early 1990s and late 1990s, this quiet, idyllic landscape of small villages and open fields became the stage for one of Ireland's most haunting mysteries. Young women, in the prime of their lives, simply vanished without a trace, as if the earth itself had swallowed them whole. The disappearances started small, whispers that grew louder as one case turned into two, then three, until it became impossible to ignore. Some called it a pattern, others something far darker. And as the shadows lengthened over Ireland's vanishing triangle, fear took root in the hearts of its people. They say that the first clue to a mystery is to follow the trail. But what happens when there is no trail? It's the kind of place you'd imagine in a storybook: rolling green hills, quaint little towns with cobblestone streets, and ancient forests whispering secrets carried by the wind. A place where life is slow, safe, and untouched by the chaos of the outside world. But behind the picturesque beauty of Ireland's vanishing triangle lies a chilling truth, a darkness that no one could have foreseen. Nestled between Dublin and the counties of Meath, Kildare, and Wicklow, this region of Ireland feels almost enchanted. Here, people know each other by name. They share stories over pints in local pubs, and news of a missing cat might cause a stir. It's the kind of place where doors are left unlocked and strangers are greeted with smiles. But for all its peace and beauty, this safe haven began to feel anything but. The very landscapes that once provided comfort, the dense forests, the quiet roads stretching into misty horizons, the silent fields now became places of dread. Every bend in the road felt like it could conceal a terrible secret, every unlit path a portal to the unknown. As the disappearances grew in number, the peaceful community began to feel the weight of unease. How could such horror take root in a place like this? How could women vanish without a sound, without a struggle, right from the heart of a community that once felt invulnerable? The contrast was jarring. The beauty of Ireland's countryside now tainted by the unknown, as if the land itself had turned against its people. The vanishing triangle had transformed from a beloved region to a realm haunted by the missing, shrouded in an unsettling mystery that seemed to linger in the very air. Annie McCarrick was a dreamer, a young woman captivated by the charm of Ireland, drawn to its history, its culture, and its people. Little did anyone know, she would become the first chapter in one of Ireland's darkest mysteries, a disappearance that would mark the beginning of a nightmare no one saw coming. Annie McCarrick, a 26-year-old from New York, had come to Ireland to immerse herself in the country she'd loved since childhood. She was vibrant, adventurous, and had a way of lighting up any room. Ireland was her dream, and she fully embraced her life there, making friends easily and exploring the countryside whenever she had the chance. It seemed like the perfect place for a young woman to spread her wings. But on a March day in 1993, Annie's story took a sudden and chilling turn. She told friends she was planning to take a day trip into the Wicklow Mountains, one of her favorite spots. That morning, she stopped by a bank in Dublin, withdrew some cash, and was last seen heading toward a local bus stop. Some reported sightings placed her in a quaint pub nestled in the heart of the mountains, a pub known for its welcoming atmosphere and scenic views. But after that, silence. When Annie failed to return home, her friends grew anxious, and soon the alarm was raised. Authorities began to retrace her steps, combing the paths and searching the mountains where she was last seen. But it was as if Annie had simply vanished into thin air, leaving behind no clues, no leads, just an empty space where she should have been. As the days turned into weeks, hope began to fade. Annie McCarrick was not a woman who would simply disappear, and yet there was nothing. No signs of a struggle, no evidence of foul play, just a blank void where her presence had once been. The mystery of her disappearance sent ripples of fear through the community. It was as though a dark cloud had settled over the Wicklow Mountains, casting shadows that no one could shake. Annie's disappearance would not only devastate her family and friends, it would also come to symbolize the beginning of something far more sinister. What started as one missing person case would soon reveal a disturbing pattern, a pattern that would haunt Ireland for years to come. When someone vanishes, there's a moment, a split second of realization that something isn't right. It starts as a nagging feeling, a faint worry, and then, with every passing hour, it grows. For Annie McCarrick's friends and family, that moment became a harrowing ordeal as they waited for a call that never came. When Annie didn't return from her day trip to the Wicklow Mountains, her friends in Dublin tried to shake off their worry, convincing themselves she'd simply lost track of time. After all, Annie was the kind of person who loved adventure, who might get swept up in the beauty of the hills or the charm of a new conversation. But when the hours turned to days, worry became fear. Her friends frantically reached out, calling her name on every street, knocking on doors, and searching the paths she would have taken. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, Annie's parents, John and Nancy McCarrick, received the dreaded call. The shock hit them like a tidal wave. Their daughter, who had only weeks before been alive with plans, was now missing, her absence casting a shadow over their lives. Police quickly got involved, launching a formal search effort. Officers retraced Annie's steps from her apartment to the bus stop, to the pub where she'd last been seen. Search teams combed through the Wicklow Mountains, examining every path, every nook and cranny. They scoured the countryside, canvassing local residents and piecing together the little information they had. But days turned to weeks, and each search came up empty handed. No signs of a struggle, no personal belongings, nothing. For the small, close knit community, it was an unsettling blow. How could someone like Annie, so full of life and laughter, simply vanish? Rumors began to circulate, filling the silence with whispered theories, but none of it brought them closer to answers. Each day without news felt heavier than the last, a painful reminder of her absence. As hope dwindled, the reality began to sink in. Annie wasn't coming back, and her disappearance marked the beginning of an unsolved puzzle. It was a wound that refused to heal, a question that refused to be answered. And as her family and friends grappled with this unimaginable loss, the fear in the community grew. One person was gone, but no one could imagine the darkness that was yet to come. One disappearance is tragic, a mystery that gnaws at the edges of a community's peace. But when a second young woman vanishes under similar circumstances, fear takes on a new shape. The unthinkable begins to settle in. This is no longer a tragic accident. This might be a pattern. The following year, in the autumn of 1994, Joe Dullard's name would join that of Annie McCarrick in a chain of chilling disappearances. Joe was 21, full of life, and like Annie, had dreams that extended beyond the borders of her hometown. She was a fighter, someone who had seen her share of hardship, but still wore a smile and radiated warmth. Life hadn't always been easy for her, but JoJo was determined, resilient, and fiercely independent. One cold November night, JoJo was hitchhiking home from Dublin after missing her bus. She had been working odd jobs in the city and was hoping to save money to start a new chapter in her life. As she stood on the edge of a darkened road in the small village of Moon, waiting for a ride, she made a quick phone call to a friend from a public payphone. She sounded relaxed, even joking about her missed bus, her voice carrying a hint of exhaustion, but none of fear. But as Jojo chatted with her friend, something happened. Her words cut off abruptly, mid sentence. Silence filled the line. Her friend waited, calling her name, hoping it was just a bad connection. But Jojo never answered. That brief call, cut short and left hanging, would be the last anyone heard from her. The news of Jojo's disappearance spread quickly, and with it, a wave of dread. This was not the first time a young woman had vanished without a trace. The familiarity of it, the quiet road, the lost connection, the silence that followed was all too haunting. For Annie's family, the news was like reopening an old wound, a reminder that they were still searching, still waiting. Authorities combed the area, hoping for clues that might explain her disappearance. They retraced her steps, questioned anyone who might have seen her, and searched tirelessly. But once again, there was nothing. Jojo, like Annie, had slipped away into the dark with no hint of where she had gone. Two young women, two unexplainable disappearances, and no answers. The realization was settling in, an unspoken fear spreading through the community. Something more sinister was at play. The idea that these cases might be connected, that they weren't isolated incidents, transformed the sense of safety in the towns and villages around the Vanishing Triangle into a fragile illusion. As the months wore on, whispers grew louder. Was there a predator hiding in plain sight? Or was it something even darker, a curse on the land itself? The disappearance of Jojo Dullard cast a long, dark shadow over Ireland, one that left families, friends, and an entire community bracing for the next tragedy. Two young women, each vanishing without a trace in the same haunting stretch of Irish countryside. Then another, and another. It was no longer a question of coincidence. This was a pattern, a disturbing web of disappearances that grew tighter with each case, leaving everyone to wonder, was there something connecting these women? And if so, who or what was behind it? As Jojo Dullard's case faded from the headlines, yet another young woman disappeared, and then another. It was as if a shadow had spread over Ireland's vanishing triangle, consuming anyone unlucky enough to cross its path. Each case was eerily similar. The women were young, vibrant, and had their lives ahead of them. They were last seen alone, often in remote areas, with no hint of danger in their final moments. No remains were ever found, and in each instance it was as if they had been erased from existence. The authorities, initially treating each case as isolated, began to feel the weight of something far more sinister. These weren't random disappearances. They were happening too close together, too predictably. With each new case, the similarities grew harder to ignore. The missing women were all within the same age range, shared similar physical traits, and vanished in the same region, an area now branded as the Vanishing Triangle. Within the Gardaí, Ireland's police force, discussions began to shift. What if these women had been chosen? What if there was a single person, or perhaps even a group, lurking within this rural area, preying on those who ventured into its quiet stretches. Officers pored over files, searching for connections between the victims. They scrutinized any overlapping details, from the locations of their last sightings to the times of day they disappeared, hoping to find the thread that would tie it all together. Locals, too, began to see a dark undercurrent running through their once peaceful towns. People whispered of a predator, someone with knowledge of the hidden paths and secluded spots that dotted the Irish countryside. Some speculated that the perpetrator must be from the area, someone who knew how to move unseen, leaving no trace. The kind of person who could blend into the community during the day and vanish like a ghost when darkness fell. Fear spread as more women went missing, and the notion of a serial offender became more than just a rumor, it became the grim reality that no one wanted to admit out loud. Each case felt like a countdown, a ticking clock that warned of another woman who would inevitably vanish, leaving behind nothing but unanswered questions and grieving families. In the hearts of those living near the vanishing triangle, a deep unease took root. Once familiar places now seemed menacing, and people began taking precautions. Women avoided walking alone. Friends checked in with each other constantly. No one knew who would be next, but everyone felt it. There was a pattern, a connection, an invisible thread binding these women together in a fate that grew darker with each new disappearance. What was happening in Ireland's vanishing triangle? And more hauntingly, who or what was behind it? As the mystery deepened, authorities and locals alike braced themselves for an answer they feared would be worse than they could imagine. With every disappearance, the urgency grew. Each case brought with it a renewed hope that this time there would be answers, that finally they'd find something, anything, to break the silence of Ireland's vanishing triangle. But each search, no matter how thorough, ended with the same haunting result: nothing. As the number of missing women climbed, so did the search efforts. Police combed through fields and forests, trekked along rugged hills, and scoured every winding road in the region. Teams of officers, search dogs, and volunteers moved methodically through the countryside, determined to uncover any sign of the women who had vanished. For days, they worked tirelessly, covering miles of dense woods and secluded trails. Helicopters scanned from above, while divers explored rivers and lakes, hoping the murky waters might reveal hidden secrets. But the searches always ended the same way: empty handed. Not a single trace was found, no articles of clothing, no belongings, not even a hint of a struggle. It was as if the earth had swallowed them whole, leaving behind no evidence that they had ever been there. This sheer absence of clues became its own kind of horror, a chilling silence that hung over the community like a heavy fog. For the investigators, the frustration was almost unbearable. They pored over every detail, questioning everyone who might know something, anything, about where the women had last been seen. Friends, family, neighbors, all were asked to recall the smallest details of the days leading up to the disappearances. But even those closest to the victims could offer little insight. In each case, the last sighting of the women had been as ordinary as any other day: a wave goodbye, a quick phone call, a short walk home. With each dead end, a creeping sense of futility set in. How could so many young women simply vanish? There were no witnesses, no suspects, and no answers. It felt as though every lead evaporated the moment it appeared, slipping through their fingers like water. In this community of tight knit towns, where everyone knew each other's name, the mystery deepened with every fruitless search, leaving families and friends in a torment of unanswered questions. And as the silence persisted, a fear began to take root among the locals, a fear that whatever force had taken these women was not only real, but also beyond the reach of conventional means. If there were clues, they were hidden far beyond human sight, buried deep within the shadows of the vanishing triangle. In the end, the searches, exhaustive as they were, could do little more than stir up the dust and amplify the confusion. All that remained was the heavy, unresolved mystery, a chain of disappearances that led nowhere, leaving behind an empty trail and a community left wondering if they were powerless against an invisible threat moving among them. With no clues, no suspects, and no clear answers, the void left by the missing women of Ireland's vanishing triangle soon filled with something else: theories, each one more chilling than the last, each one a desperate attempt to make sense of the senseless. As the disappearances continued to baffle investigators, theories began to swirl around the community, whispered in quiet corners and printed in newspaper headlines. People needed explanations, something tangible to ease their growing fear, and soon the unsettling ideas began to take shape. One theory was that these women had been kidnapped, taken by someone with knowledge of the area's hidden roads and isolated spots. Perhaps this person was a drifter, someone passing through the countryside, unseen by the locals, choosing his victims at random before slipping back into the night. This idea took hold among those who wanted to believe that whatever was happening had come from outside, something foreign that could be stopped. Others feared the disappearances were linked to human trafficking. This theory, while difficult to confirm, struck a nerve in the community. The thought of these women being taken against their will, smuggled out of the country, and disappearing into a hidden underworld of crime was horrifying, but it was an explanation that made a cruel kind of sense to those grasping for answers. Yet, there was another, even more disturbing theory, one that brought a shiver of dread whenever it was mentioned. Some began to speak of a mysterious man, spotted around the last known locations of some of the women. His presence had been reported in vague, fleeting sightings, his face always described as unfamiliar, his demeanor unsettling. He was said to linger in places where he didn't belong, watching, waiting. But each time someone reported seeing him, he seemed to vanish without a trace, much like the women themselves. As the stories of this stranger spread, people began to wonder if he was the key to the mystery. Could he be a predator hiding in plain sight, moving quietly through the community? Or was he simply a phantom conjured by fear and imagination, a figure who existed only in the shadows of a frightened town? There were no records of this man, no concrete evidence, just whispers and a growing sense of unease. Investigators, too, began to take these theories seriously, though none could be confirmed. They were left with a mosaic of possibilities, each one darker than the last, each one leading them further down a twisted path. But no matter how hard they tried to pin down a suspect or track a lead, the result was always the same. The theories remained just that: uncertain, unproven, and hauntingly incomplete. As the months turned into years, the theories grew like weeds in a garden of despair. People clung to them, hoping that one of these ideas would unlock the truth. But instead, each theory only deepened the mystery. The vanishing triangle now held more than just the secrets of the missing. It was a breeding ground for fears that stretched far beyond the borders of Ireland, leaving everyone wondering if they were safe or if, at any moment, they might be next. In the absence of answers, these theories became both a source of hope and a reminder of their darkest fears. If the truth was out there, it remained just out of reach, slipping into the shadows each time someone thought they'd found a clue. And so the mystery continued, with the specter of the vanishing triangle haunting the Irish countryside, as elusive and terrifying as ever. It was a name that would send chills down the spine of an entire country, a name that transformed a quiet region of Ireland into a place shrouded in mystery and fear, the Vanishing Triangle. With each new disappearance, the triangle grew darker, casting a shadow that would linger long after the names of the missing had faded. As the cases piled up, each one echoing the tragic silence of the last, it became clear that these disappearances were part of something larger, something that could no longer be ignored or dismissed as coincidence. Journalists, desperate to capture the public's attention and convey the horror of what was happening, soon dubbed the area the Vanishing Triangle. And just like that, a chilling term was born, capturing the sense of dread that had gripped the community. The triangle encompassed the stretch of land between Dublin and the counties of Meath, Kildare, and Wicklow, areas once known for their lush landscapes and historical charm. But the new label brought a sinister edge to the map. Instead of fields and hills, people now saw danger zones, places marked by invisible boundaries that seemed to swallow anyone who wandered too close. The media seized on the name, its ominous tone sparking a surge of public interest and debate. Headlines warned of the triangle's latest victim. Interviews were conducted with families and friends who pleaded for answers, and grainy photographs of the missing women were plastered on front pages across the nation. Each new article, each new report, further cemented the idea that something deeply sinister was haunting this part of Ireland. The label also fueled a fresh wave of theories. Some speculated that the triangle was cursed, haunted by ancient spirits angered by forgotten sins of the past. Others believed the disappearances were the work of a meticulous predator, one who was hiding in plain sight and playing a twisted game with his victims. The Vanishing Triangle became a place of urban legend, a topic that filled hours of conversation in pubs and haunted the thoughts of anyone who lived nearby. For those living within its boundaries, the name brought more than just fear, it brought a sense of isolation. People began to look at their neighbors with suspicion, wondering who among them could be responsible, or whether the very land itself held some dark secret. Parents warned their daughters not to travel alone, friends made pacts to stay in groups, and a once peaceful community transformed into a place where every stranger's face seemed to hold a threat. But for all the fear it generated, the term vanishing triangle was a double edged sword. On one hand, it raised public awareness and kept the cases in the national spotlight, ensuring that the missing women would not be forgotten. But on the other, it added a layer of mystery that felt almost insurmountable. It was as if the triangle itself were alive, feeding on the fear and despair it had sown. The mystery continued to deepen, and the vanishing triangle became a symbol of unanswered questions, a dark corner of Ireland where loved ones could disappear without a trace, leaving nothing behind but echoes of the life they once had. And as more women vanished, the boundaries of the triangle seemed to stretch, swallowing anyone who dared to challenge the darkness within. What was really happening within the vanishing triangle? As the country watched in horror, it became clear that the truth was buried somewhere deep, locked away in shadows that even the brightest lights could not reach. With each new disappearance, the fear grew sharper, the urgency more intense. What had started as isolated tragedies became a full blown crisis, one that threatened to upend the peace of Ireland's countryside. And as families pleaded for answers, the cracks in the country's missing person protocols became glaringly apparent. The disappearances of Annie McCarrick, Joe Dullard, and other young women threw Ireland's law enforcement into uncharted territory. Missing persons cases had always existed, but never on this scale, and never with so few leads. the police were faced with the impossible task of tracking down individuals who had vanished without a single trace, forcing them to confront the limitations of their existing protocols. There was no centralized system for missing persons, no unified way to track cases across different counties, and this lack of structure hindered their ability to respond swiftly and effectively. Pressure mounted from the public, from families, and from within the Garda itself. Calls flooded police stations, demanding answers and action. News outlets ran stories highlighting the gaps in the investigation, raising questions about why so many cases remained unsolved. As fear spread, the community's trust in law enforcement began to fray. People were angry, afraid, and desperate for reassurance, but all they received were quiet reassurances and statements that, to many, sounded hollow. In response to the outcry, Ireland's missing person protocols began to evolve. Lawmakers started discussing reforms, including the creation of a dedicated unit within the Gardaí to handle missing person cases and improvements to coordination across jurisdictions. Although change was slow, the disappearances within the Vanishing Triangle had exposed the country's vulnerability, and these cases became the catalyst for much needed reform. But despite these efforts, the families still had no answers. The fear and frustration continued to boil over as each passing day marked another without resolution. Another family left to wonder what had happened to their loved one in the shadows of the vanishing triangle. For the families of the missing women, life had become an agonizing waiting game, a relentless search for answers where none seemed to exist. And yet, despite the silence, they refused to give up. Their voices became the heartbeat of a movement, a reminder that these weren't just statistics, they were daughters, sisters, friends. In the absence of official answers, the families of the missing women took matters into their own hands. Driven by a fierce determination, they became tireless advocates for their loved ones, doing everything they could to keep the cases alive in the public eye. The mothers, fathers, and siblings of the missing women organized rallies, circulated flyers, and held candlelight vigils. They spoke with reporters, sharing their stories, painting vivid pictures of the women they had lost, reminding the world that these were not just names in a headline, they were real people with real lives. Some of the families even took to the countryside themselves, retracing the steps of their daughters, hoping against hope that they might find something the police had missed. They walked the paths, searched the forests, and left flowers at the spots where their daughters had last been seen, holding on to the faintest glimmers of hope. For them, every day was a battle against despair, a reminder of the pain of not knowing. Their resilience became an anchor for the community, a testament to love and perseverance in the face of unimaginable sorrow. And as more families joined their ranks, the community's solidarity grew. Strangers came together to search, friends volunteered to help, and the relentless efforts of these families kept the mystery of the vanishing triangle from slipping into oblivion. The pain of the unknown weighed heavily on them, but it was this very pain that drove them to continue, to push for answers that seemed always just out of reach. And though they didn't yet have the closure they longed for, their voices became a beacon, a reminder that these cases would not be forgotten. If only the walls could talk, if only the roads could remember. For as the mystery of the vanishing triangle deepened, a small number of witnesses began to come forward, each with stories that hinted at strange figures and eerie occurrences, details that could hold the key to unraveling the truth. Despite the lack of concrete evidence, the disappearances had not gone completely unnoticed. Several people came forward, claiming to have seen the missing women on the days of their disappearances. Some remembered passing a young woman on a quiet road. Others recalled a friendly encounter that seemed completely ordinary at the time. Each witness described seeing the women alive, going about their lives as usual until they were gone. But there were other witnesses too, those who spoke of unsettling incidents that left them with a feeling of dread. One person reported seeing an unfamiliar man lurking near one of the last known locations of the women, a figure whose presence felt oddly out of place. Another witness mentioned noticing a car parked on a secluded road, its driver barely visible, watching as people passed. These fragments of memory painted an eerie picture, one that suggested someone, or perhaps several people, might have been following the women, watching them from the shadows. The witness statements were vague, often conflicting, and rarely offered any concrete leads, but they hinted at a disturbing possibility that someone may have been stalking these women, moving through the vanishing triangle with a purpose only he understood. Law enforcement took these accounts seriously, but without physical evidence, each sighting became just another thread in a tangled web. Yet, these witnesses added a chilling layer to the case. The knowledge that someone might have noticed something strange but didn't act fast enough, or that a single encounter could have been a missed opportunity to save a life, weighed heavily on everyone involved. It was an unsettling truth that perhaps the mystery had been glimpsed, fleetingly, by those who had brushed against its edges. In the end, the potential witnesses could only add to the uncertainty, their stories offering glimpses into a world where normalcy was stripped away by fear. And as the details piled up, the vanishing triangle grew darker, a place haunted by fleeting glimpses of something sinister, a shadow that seemed almost within reach, yet remained maddeningly out of grasp. In a time when fear had already begun to grip the community, the media's spotlight became both a source of hope and a flame that fueled a growing panic. Headlines screamed of a predator, of women vanishing without a trace, leaving readers and viewers to wonder who or what could be stalking the vanishing triangle. The media latched onto the story with fervor. Each new disappearance was treated as front page news, with journalists quick to draw connections, suggesting a shadowy figure was preying on young women in the area. Articles ran wild with speculation, each headline more chilling than the last. The words possible serial killer and Ireland's vanishing triangle became part of a growing narrative that captured the public's imagination and its fear. Television anchors spoke of the disappearances with grave expressions, warning viewers to stay vigilant, while radio hosts debated the theories circulating in the community. Some experts hinted at a lone predator, a phantom who knew the landscape well and chose his victims carefully. Others suggested a larger network, a group involved in human trafficking or some other dark enterprise. The newspapers printed warnings for young women, urging them not to travel alone, to stay away from the area after dark. In the midst of this frenzy, Ireland's once peaceful countryside took on an almost mythical status, becoming a place that no one wanted to enter and everyone feared. The triangle was now a symbol of dread, a region with invisible boundaries marked not by lines on a map, but by the whispered tales of those who feared becoming its next victim. The intense media coverage added to the pressure on law enforcement and stoked public debate, with some accusing the Gardaí of not doing enough, while others questioned if the stories had become more fiction than fact. And yet, as terrifying as the media portrayal was, it kept the cases alive. The public, gripped by fear, refused to let go of the mystery, each new theory sparking a fresh wave of anxiety and debate. The Vanishing Triangle had become a legend in its own right, a haunting tale of disappearances that showed no signs of ending, as both locals and those from afar watched and waited for the next tragedy. For the families, friends, and community, there was nothing more painful than the passage of time. What had once been an urgent search for answers slowly slipped into silence, the headlines fading, the public interest waning. But the dread, that gnawing sense that something dark still lurked within the vanishing triangle, never left. As days turned into months and months into years, the frantic search for answers began to lose its momentum. Leads that had once seemed promising grew stale, and potential suspects vanished into the haze of unconfirmed rumors. Investigators, stretched thin and haunted by dead ends, found themselves without new information to act on. Theories were plentiful, but evidence remained elusive. For the families, the realization that the cases had gone cold was a devastating blow. They had spent countless hours searching, hoping, fighting for answers, only to face a wall of silence. Friends and community members, once active in the search efforts, began to return to their routines, and the places where the women had last been seen grew quieter, their tragic histories slipping into the background. The public's attention, once so sharply focused on the vanishing triangle, began to drift elsewhere. New stories took its place, new tragedies stole the headlines, and soon the names of the missing women were mentioned less and less. Yet, for those who had been closest to the mystery, the fear remained. The vanishing triangle had not released its hold. It lingered like a shadow over the community, a reminder of lives unaccounted for, and a threat that seemed to have retreated into silence, waiting for its next move. And so, the cases grew cold, their mysteries left to linger in the dim corners of memory, haunting those who still remembered, who still wondered, who still feared that the darkness had merely paused, not disappeared. Years passed, and the unsolved cases of the vanishing triangle seemed almost like a legend, a story of loss and mystery. But with the arrival of new forensic technologies and a renewed interest in cold cases, hope flickered back to life. Could the secrets of the triangle finally be revealed? In the early 2000s, a surge of interest in cold cases brought new attention to the disappearances within Ireland's vanishing triangle. Advances in forensic technology, including improved DNA analysis and data matching techniques, had begun to unlock answers in cases that once seemed hopeless. Law enforcement agencies across the world were reopening long forgotten investigations, and the families of Ireland's missing women saw a glimmer of possibility. Perhaps, at last, there might be answers. The Gardaí launched a renewed effort, revisiting the files, re examining the evidence, and using new tools to analyze even the smallest fragments of information. Old witness statements were reread, locations re examined, and overlooked details brought back to the surface. Investigators looked for any trace of DNA, any piece of evidence that might have gone undetected during the initial searches. The public, too, showed renewed interest as media outlets ran updated stories and investigative journalists revisited the mystery. For the families, this rekindled hope was bittersweet. They had lived with the silence for so long, learned to navigate life in the shadow of unanswered questions, and now, after years of waiting, the promise of closure seemed within reach. They pored over every update, every hint of progress, clinging to the belief that this renewed investigation might finally bring them the peace they had been denied for so long. Yet, even as new hope emerged, the triangle held fast to its secrets. For all the advancements in technology, there were still gaps in the evidence, still holes in the timeline. The new investigation breathed life back into the search for truth, but with it came the reminder that some mysteries defy even the most powerful tools of science. But one thing was certain: the vanishing triangle was not forgotten. The renewed attention kept it alive in the minds of the Irish people, a puzzle that, even decades later, refused to fade. And as the investigation continued, one question remained. Would this be the key to unlocking the truth, or was the triangle's darkness destined to remain a mystery forever? As the investigations dragged on, a disturbing theory emerged, one that could explain the terrifying pattern of disappearances: a serial killer. Could a single person be responsible for the heartbreak that haunted the Vanishing Triangle? The theory of a serial killer began to gain traction as experts in criminal behavior were consulted. Profilers studied the cases, noting how each woman fit a certain profile and vanished without leaving a trace. This kind of meticulousness, the ability to move in and out undetected, suggested a level of skill, perhaps even experience. They proposed that the person behind these disappearances could be someone who had mastered the art of concealment, someone who knew how to avoid detection and hide evidence. Experts pointed to certain patterns seen in serial offenders, targeting individuals who were alone, careful selection of secluded areas, and a lack of physical evidence left behind. If a serial killer was indeed stalking Ireland's countryside, he would have needed an intimate knowledge of the Vanishing Triangle's landscape, an understanding of how to disappear without leaving a trace. The chilling thought was that this person could still be out there, watching, waiting. But could a single person truly be responsible? Or was there something more complex, an operation involving multiple individuals working together to prey upon the innocent? While many believed in the idea of a lone predator, others began to wonder if these disappearances were the result of more than one person. Some speculated that an organized group might be at play, orchestrating these vanishings with chilling precision. Perhaps it wasn't one person who knew the triangle's dark secrets, but several working together, creating a cover for one another, and ensuring that no one was left to tell the tale. This theory offered a different kind of horror: the idea that these disappearances weren't just random acts by a single predator, but instead a coordinated effort with motives far more complex. Some speculated about trafficking rings, others about cults or underground networks operating in secrecy. But as sinister as these theories were, they only deepened the mystery, presenting more questions than answers. The thought that the Vanishing Triangle might harbor not just one shadow, but several made the mystery even darker. If there were multiple suspects, each disappearance would have been carefully orchestrated. Each victim carefully selected, a haunting idea that left the community on edge. Over the years, occasional glimmers of hope have emerged: new leads, fresh tips, renewed interest. Each one raises the question: is this the moment the triangle's secrets will finally be laid bare? As years went by, the case remained unsolved, but hope didn't die completely. Every now and then, a new tip would surface, a potential lead that reignited interest. Sometimes it was a witness who remembered a strange detail, an investigator who noticed something previously overlooked, or even a family member who found a new piece of evidence. With the advancement of technology, old evidence was re examined, data was cross referenced, and investigators began to leverage modern tools to try and bring clarity to these cold cases. Although each new lead brought hope, they often dissolved under scrutiny, leaving everyone right back where they started. Yet, the hope that one of these leads might finally yield answers has kept the mystery alive, pushing people to dig deeper, to look closer. For the families of the missing women, the Vanishing Triangle is more than a mystery. It is a wound that has never healed, a question they've spent years trying to answer. They have become relentless voices for their daughters, refusing to let the silence swallow them whole. The families of the missing women have never stopped searching for answers. They have held vigils, met with investigators, and pored over every detail, refusing to let the cases fade into obscurity. For them, each day without an answer is another day of torment, a reminder of the daughter, sister, or friend taken from them too soon. They have become advocates not only for their loved ones, but for all the lost voices within the vanishing triangle. Through their efforts, the women who vanished have never been forgotten. The families have worked tirelessly to keep the mystery in the public eye, demanding answers, holding authorities accountable, and making sure that no one forgets the names of those who disappeared. Their dedication reminds us that behind every unsolved case is a family whose life has been shattered, whose search for truth continues no matter how many years have passed. The mystery of the vanishing triangle has left a lasting impact, not only on Ireland, but on everyone who has heard its haunting tale. Its legacy has transformed how the country approaches missing persons cases, bringing about changes and heightening awareness. But the question remains, will its secrets ever be uncovered? The Vanishing Triangle has become more than just a place on a map. It is now part of Ireland's history, a chilling chapter that has left an indelible mark on the nation. The disappearances have led to significant changes in how missing persons cases are handled, sparking reforms and bringing new resources to bear on future cases. Awareness about personal safety has increased, especially among young women, who are now more cautious, more aware of their surroundings, and less likely to venture alone in remote areas. But beyond the reforms and awareness, the vanishing triangle remains an unsolved puzzle, a legacy of lives cut short, of families left in limbo, and of a dark mystery that lingers over the Irish countryside like a shadow. The fear, the questions, the theories, all of it remains a reminder of something unfinished, something waiting to be revealed. As we close this chapter, the mystery remains unsolved. Could someone out there hold the key to unlocking the truth? If you have any theories, any thoughts on the case, or know of new information, share it in the comments below. The vanishing triangle may have claimed its secrets for now, but with every voice, every piece of insight, we edge closer to finding answers. Let's keep this story alive because somewhere the truth awaits.